Should we do some business now?
Yeah, sure.
Let's try that. You've been here for 20 years, but you are originally a New Jersey/New York guy.
Yep.
So what made you want to, besides, your wife's from here, what professionally drew you to coming here?
Well, before I came here, I was actually working on the reconstruction of the World Trade Center site. I joined that effort right after 9/11, in fact, and I spent 3 years working on that plan. And it was an amazing experience, difficult experience, what was really in some ways an opportunity to rebuild, but couldn't really be considered an opportunity because it was based on such a tragic event. And after 3 years of that, I was kind of ready to move on to something else. And the Waterfront in Toronto, the project at the time, was really one of the most unparalleled opportunities, and I also felt like one that was really an opportunity, and we would be allowed to talk about it as an opportunity to do something great.
Did you know anything about it as a New Yorker?
Well, I'd come here a few times because of Kira. I actually did a high school orchestra exchange here also, so I had been here back in the day when the Eaton Center, I think, was still pretty new.
Yeah. So that's a while ago.
Yeah.
Okay. And the times when you did come back to Toronto, because we remember those days as well, and we looked at the waterfront and we said, wow, this doesn't really connect with the city, and whatever they're doing down there, a lot of it is lousy. Did you think there's an opportunity?
I did, and in fact, Kira drove me around a couple times, and I remember having her stop the car on Queens Quay so that I could get out and take some pictures, and I thought, they've actually done some good things with the waterfront, but it was kind of contained to the area around Harbourfront Centre, and the rest of it seemed much more ripe for change. And when I actually interviewed for the job here, I remember my cab driver took me in on Queens Quay on a very dark winter day. And I thought, boy, this street really is not a great way to recognize and greet people into this fabulous city's waterfront. Mm-hmm. So it seemed like lots of potential, lots of funding, and lots of political support at the time for doing something great.
Waterfront Toronto's almost a quarter century old.
Yep.
Formed by the 3 different orders of government. What was the mission that the place was infused with when it started?
So I think we were created in some ways out of a failed Olympic bid, the 2008 bid, which brought all 3 levels of government together because you really need all the governments to make the Olympics happen. And once that energy had been started, even after Toronto lost the bid, because the bid had been focused on the waterfront, people said, well, is there still an opportunity here to do something with that and make something great? And Bob Fung, who chaired the Fung Task Force, was very persuasive, I think, at making a business case to the Premier, Prime Minister, and the mayors at the time that, this was a great investment, and he laid out a vision for it, which in many ways is still guiding what we're trying to do. He described it as Canada's gateway to the world, that this should be a project of national significance that could transform the world's perception of Canada, and that's actually baked right into our mandate, that's what we're here to do.
My first job 42 years ago was Toronto City Hall reporter, and one of the big stories I remember covering at that time were the Wong and Dansky condos that they built on the waterfront, which everybody thought were a disaster in terms of planning.
Yep.
Are we doing a little better since then?
Well, I think we certainly are. I remember the Wang and Dansky lesson when I got here because everyone talked about the wall of condos, and we can't build a wall of condos. And one of the things that Waterfront Toronto spent a lot of time and energy on was public consultation. So the early plans that we did for the West Don lands, which some of you may know as the Ataratiri lands, as well as what we call the East Bayfront, which is all that property to the east of the Redpath Sugar Factory. There were huge public debates and participation in trying to figure out how we could develop and intensify the waterfront without recreating the wall of condos. And I think everyone's kind of happier with the results that have come since we've been doing that than the backlash from the Wang and Dansky, which left a mark.
No kidding. So here's where I come in with my first high tight fastball, which is to say, in spite of everything you just said, does anybody know Waterfront Toronto exists? Citizens, the citizens of Toronto, do they know?
I think that there are a lot of citizens who do, but certainly a lot who don't. And I think the downtown core knows a lot about us. I think it has been more of a challenge to bring it really far out into the city. And we've tried many things. We've done consultations in Etobicoke, and we've done consultations in Scarborough. And I think what you find is there are a lot of individuals out there who love the waterfront and come here. It's a very demographically diverse waterfront. It is used by the whole city. but it is not a front and center issue for many of those neighborhoods.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, each neighborhood has its own challenges, right? Everybody's got lots of things they want in their neighborhood, and the waterfront it's not core to their daily existence unless they're the folks who come down here and take the ferry across to the islands for the most part. And I think the islands are seen as this amazing oasis that probably don't need a lot of revitalization. I think people get off at Union Station, they take the streetcar down here, they get on a ferry, they go to the islands, and then when they're done, they do that in reverse. And they haven't historically been spreading out and experiencing the rest of the city.
Again, I'm going to harken back to my first job, and there was no question back then. Toronto stopped at Front Street.
Yeah.
It really did. That's not true anymore, but I mean, if 10 out of 10 means a perfectly connected city between downtown and the water, where are we right now?
Well, right now we're probably a little below a 5, but one of the plans that we've been working on is to extend the streetcar service out to the eastern waterfront. So we're in the midst of doing the technical design work for an extension. So right now the streetcar comes down Bayview, turns west and heads out across Queens Quay. The plan is to actually punch through that tunnel connection and bring it up onto Queens Quay and extend it east and out into the Portlands. And that's something that we've been in discussions with the governments about funding. It's hard to get transit funding because there's a lot of priorities. But once that happens, I think that will dramatically increase the access. You know, the other big debate when I arrived here was what to do with the Gardiner. There were people advocating to tear the entire thing down. That's not where the city's decision fell. They wanted to keep it up. And so our approach has also been to create a great waterfront that once you're here, it can be a great waterfront. Can more be done with the connections? Absolutely.
I don't know if you heard the Premier musing the other day about some announcement he was about to make related to the Gardiner Expressway and transportation on the waterfront. He didn't say what it would be, but if you had your druthers, what would you like to see?
Well, what I would love to see, if we're going to do something with the Gardiner, is to follow through on the plan that was approved by City Council a number of years ago for what was called the hybrid solution, which is to rebuild the Gardiner farther north, east of Cherry Street. So at Cherry Street, the Gardiner takes this odd bend, comes right down to the Keating Channel, cuts off that bit of water from the rest of the city, and then connects up with the Don Valley Parkway. The design that we put forward would actually shove it up much closer to the rail corridor, and that unlocks all that land. And in the fullness of time, the Keating Channel can actually be a miraculously beautiful urban canal lined with great retail and restaurants and shops and high-density development on either side. And that's the kind of long-term goal for it. But it does require the Gardiner to be moved into that new location in order for that to be unlocked. So I hope that we're able to follow through on that.
We're probably not going to rip it down. We're probably not going to bury it. What about stacking it? Stacking. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I'm not exactly sure about stacking it. I mean, that's, you know, there was a proposal to actually try to convert some of it into a greenway. But even if you stacked it where it is now, it's still not really in the right place. I mean, you might be able to narrow it a bit by doing that, but it wouldn't unlock some of that land.
Okay, let's go up to 35,000 feet here. The ingredients required to make a great waterfront are what?
So we did extensive research into some of the great waterfronts. We looked at the top 10 big cities, not the small cities, and we saw a number of factors that really lead to success. Certainly one of them is having a multiplicity of really world-class destinations. So those great waterfronts, the cities have really focused their bests down on their waterfronts.
For example, like what?
So think about Amsterdam has their National Gallery on the waterfront. Think about Sydney has the Opera House on the waterfront. Amsterdam's also built the iFilm Institute on its waterfront, an amazing building and an amazing institution dedicated to film. There's many, many examples like that. So the key is not to just have one or two, the key is to have many. And one of the most important of those is a cluster of cultural anchors of some sort, cluster of destinations. So if you look at Chicago, there's the whole museum campus that's out in Grant Park. So you have the Adler Planetarium, which is one of the best planetariums in the country. You have the Field Museum, which is very heavily visited, and the Shed Aquarium, which is the most visited aquarium in the United States. They're all right there together. They attract millions of people to that waterfront every year.
How far are we away from that?
Well, we're working with our development partners, some of whom are here in the room tonight, on Quayside, and one of our goals for that is to take the block on the east side of Parliament Slip, which is near the silos, and we've tried to set that aside for a major cultural institution. And so our developers are in fact working with us to try to see if there is a user who would be interested in that site. Can't really disclose who we're talking to, but I think it's a great site. It could have an iconic building on it, and we want it to be the type of institution that'll attract 500,000 to 1 million visitors a year. That would really start to create the critical mass, because one of the things people feel is missing down here is all the great restaurants and all of that, and those can't really survive on a waterfront that's only active for a few months of the year, which our waterfront largely is. We don't have enough big year-round destinations down here, so that's one of the things we've got to get.
You know I can't let that go without following up, so I'm going to follow up. I get you can't tell us who you're negotiating with, but can you give us a sense about what kind of cultural institution you might be thinking of?
Well, so the idea of some sort of performing space, like a theater, of some decent size that is maybe a gap in the offerings that we have in Toronto would be one. We've also been talking about an Indigenous center. We do not have a lot of great representation yet of our Indigenous heritage in Toronto, and a facility on the waterfront could bring lots and lots of people into contact with our whole Indigenous history and our Indigenous communities. So that's another one that is a possibility. And some of these could be on other sites on the waterfront as well, so it's a little hard for me to tell you specifically what is going to go where. A major art museum is something that we've heard recommended by people like Joe Barrage, who's here in the audience cheering. We've got great art museums in Toronto. Is there another one that could locate down here? Maybe, or could one of the existing ones open up a satellite down here? Could the ROM open up a satellite down here? Could some of the newer cultural institutions open up something down here? All of this takes money, but as Richard Florida has said, like, we need to stop thinking about the waterfront as a cost and start thinking about it as an investment.
Right. I want to make sure I understand what your definition of the waterfront includes. Like, is the Sky Dome part of your waterfront? The CN Tower, the planet, what do they call that? Aquarium. Ripley's Aquarium, yeah. Is that part of the waterfront to you?
Well, that's a really great question. It's actually one we debate. But I would say they are not perceived as part of the waterfront today. But I would also say they're really close to the waterfront. And I think one of the things we're lacking, which gets back to your earlier question, is connections. If you try to get from the CN Tower or the Rogers Centre to the waterfront, it is a truly miserable experience. Is there a way to transform that? We've seen some interesting proposals. There's a number now of bridges that have been built across Lakeshore that create a pretty good experience for getting down there. Is there an opportunity to do something like that? And then that might start to make those facilities feel like they're part of the waterfront. So I think there's ways to break through that barrier, but that barrier right now is people think that's not the waterfront. So in fact, Richard Florida even said, we should have some stadiums down by the waterfront. And we have like 2 huge ones that are 2 blocks away from the waterfront, but nobody thinks of them as part of the waterfront, right? So
The Sky Dome and BMO Field? Is that what you're thinking of?
Scotiabank Arena.
Oh, okay. You said stadiums. Is that considered a stadium?
Sports. It's an arena.
Right,
yes,
it's an arena. Okay.
Have you worked on planning the Olympics or something? You're very good with your sport venue terms.
Okay. All right. So back to ingredients. Cultural institutions. We understand. Tell us the next big ingredient that is required for a great waterfront.
So flagship parks, and we certainly have the Toronto Islands, but they're not physically directly connected. They're fabulous. And that's something that we're actually working on delivering right now. So we are flood protecting the Don River, which is one of our biggest projects. We're taking about 600 acres of land out of the floodplain. Some of you may have seen the announcement about removing the North Plug which was the event where we actually inundated the new river channel that's been dug. It's not yet connected to the river, but it will be in a matter of months, and then that will start to unlock the flood protection and unlock the development potential. But flood protecting the land alone isn't enough, so we've actually built first a huge aquatic habitat wetland restoration, which is bringing back some of the original types of habitat that would have been on the Don, and that was part of the mandate for the original EA. But then we're also building a huge riverside park system. So we will be opening in about a year's time 50 acres of new parks and wetlands that will all be publicly accessible. And that's the largest new park that will have been opened in downtown Toronto in over 50 years. And it is being designed by Michael van Valkenburg, who's one of the leading landscape architects in the world right now. And it is very much going to be a kind of Olmsted park. And I think it will really achieve that definition of a flagship park. Central Park is the classic example of a flagship park, and this is not as big as that, but it's quite significant.
How welcoming do you want the waterfront to be to cars?
Well, I think we need car access. I would look at what we did with Queens Quay West. So Queens Quay West was a 4-lane, practically highway, though it didn't move at a highway speed, before we did our Queens Quay renovation project. And what we did there was we said, we're going to rebalance this street. We're not going to say we're anti-car, we don't want to get rid of cars, but the cars were taking up about 60% of the right-of-way, with the remaining 40% left over for transit, walking, cycling, and we did counts, and virtually no one was cycling on Queens Quay, and not a lot of people strolled on Queens Quay. Most people would hurriedly walk to their destination and avoid the sidewalk. So we repurposed the street, we rebalanced it, we gave a lot more space to pedestrians and cyclists. The Martin Goodman Trail on that section of Queens Quay is now the busiest bike trail in the city by a factor of 2, and people now actually stroll and promenade on Queens Quay as if it is a relaxing, inviting environment to be in. And we still have vehicular access that serves all of the buildings. So the idea of going totally car-free is one that has resurfaced in many iterations of urban planning. I personally don't think you need to get rid of the cars. You need to balance them, and you need to design rights of way that are actually great places to be, not functional arterial roads. And that can all be done while keeping everybody whole. And Queens Quay works quite well now in the section we did. Now, if you look at the section to the east, there's all kinds of problems there from the Gardiner work that's going on, so you can't count that. But the section on the west, the traffic's actually better with the 2 lanes than it was with the 4 lanes.
How close are you to where you think you need to be in terms of public transit at the waterfront now?
Well, the waterfront transit line is being prioritized by the governments, so I think we're making great progress there. It is recognized as something we really need. It's a message that has to continually be reinforced, particularly if we want some of this commercial development on the waterfront. We could probably develop it with residential condominiums, many of which would be served by cars. We could probably do that. But if we want some of these big destinations, if we want commercial, if we want employment, we've got to have the transit. And so we keep delivering that message. I would say we're closer than we've ever been in the 20 years that I've been here. We've got a lot of alignment now on what the plan should be, and we've got it elevated in the priority level, and governments are really engaging with the idea of funding it. So,
how much is the Ontario line part of what you would like to see down here?
well, the Ontario line is great. It has one stop that gets close to the waterfront. The rest of it is probably not going to directly benefit the waterfront. It's a great thing for the city, don't get me wrong, but it will help a little on the east side, but what we really need is the transit line on Queens Quay. That's really what will create
And the Waterfront
access.
LRT, that's what you're talking about?
Waterfront LRT.
Where would that start? Where would that end?
So it would leave Union Station, come down Bay Street, and instead of going west like it does now, which it would continue to do, there'd be another branch that would turn east, run along Queens Quay to Cherry Street, and then at Cherry Street, connect down and go across one of the two beautiful new bridges that we recently built, and start to service the Portlands and Villiers Island, which is the great new development opportunity on the waterfront.
Now, you say you are confident you have the different orders of government prioritizing this in a way that meets your satisfaction? Do you think so? Because I got to tell you, I don't necessarily see that.
I think what I'm saying is the conversations are better than they've ever been. Does that mean we're going to see a check tomorrow? I'm not going to say that, but I have not seen so much alignment on this project in the past as I see now.
Okay, because well, let me put it this way. You've got governments, you've got philanthropists, you've got business people, you've got citizens. I mean, there's a lot of people in the mix here, and everybody's got their own pet projects and priorities, right? They all do. And I guess I want to know, what's the case when you go in and have these meetings with the various orders of government? What's the case that you make that whatever they think of a waterfront LRT, whatever they thought about it in the past, here's why you need to move it up your priority list, because if you do, what?
Well, the city's facing a huge housing crisis right now, as I think everyone knows, affordability, availability. The waterfront is one of the great opportunities to start to address that housing crisis. We've got lots of acres of land that are about to be available for redevelopment when the flood protection is put in place, and it would be a huge missed opportunity to not have transit out there early when that's being developed. We can build thousands of housing units. We've delivered 2 neighborhoods, the West Donlands and East Bayfront, which in total have about 17,000 people living in them already, and they're only about 3/4 built. Villiers Island alone, with the increased density that we took through council, will have about 17,000 people living in it. And then there's the rest of the Portlands, which can have many times that density and start to reach that number that George Zagarek talked about of getting up to 100,000 people. You really can't build a city of 100,000 people without transit if it is urban. Peterborough might survive without a LRT line, but very hard to make an urban downtown survive without an LRT line. So if we want to use this great opportunity to try to solve our housing problem or help solve our housing problem, transit's got to be a piece of that.
Okay, so we're talking cultural industries, we're talking transit, we're talking parkland, we're talking about consideration for the car. Anything else on that list of ingredients that you think is the special sauce for this?
Well, I think another one is water-based transportation. I think we've got the wonderful historical ferries out to the islands, but they're not really part of our transit system. And we haven't really thought very much about ferries as part of a transit network in Toronto, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. And so we are actually doing a study right now as part of our marine use strategy, looking at the potential viability of some sort of a sea bus system that would run on a fixed route and start to connect up points in the harbor. And now that development is happening to the east, the demand is being more and more spread out location-wise as to where people want to go. We have a lot of water taxis that are very popular and people use them, but they'll start to max out as we develop more and more on the waterfront. And that inner harbor service, we think could take some of the load off of our congestion problems, but there may be opportunities for that to even go beyond the inner harbor. Could we have service out west, out east, and start to bring people downtown on boats? And I think the successful cities have very robust ferry systems that are integrated really within their transit system. In many cases, you can just buy your ticket for the subway, make a transfer, get on a boat. In Amsterdam, the IJ River has free ferries across it because they have, I think, one vehicular tunnel, which is not nearly enough. So they have a whole series of electric-powered free ferries that run continuously throughout the day, and they're integrated with the transit system. Obviously, you don't have to pay. Anyone can use it. And it moves a lot of people between the two sides of the city. So, and they become part of an identification with the waterfront, getting people onto the water.
Let me give this audience just like a 2-minute heads up. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, and then I think somebody's got a microphone, and we'll bring it around, and anybody else who wants to ask a question, there's our guy in the corner there with the mic, so we'll do that in just a second. Okay, this is not meant to be a smart aleck question, but let me try it anyway. There's lots of organizations that have got a piece of this, right?
Yep.
Why is your organization, in your view, kind of best positioned to lead whatever's going to happen here?
So I think one of the keys to Waterfront Toronto and its success is that we are actually a tri-government organization. So much of what happens on the waterfront is covered by jurisdictions from the city to the province to the federal government. We also have problems here that require a lot of funding. So the flood protection project that we're doing on the Don River is now about a $1.4 billion project. Very hard for any one government to fund that, but also the benefits of that investment are going to flow back to all 3 governments. And so the waterfront in particular needs that kind of tri-government cooperation and collaboration, and that's what we've been doing for 20 years. We've gotten 2 big funding tranches from all 3 governments where they share in the cost. And I think that's very key. And we also we are persistent. So election cycles can change, governments can change. I've been here 20 years, Meg has been here almost 20 years. Like, we're able to follow these things through, and they have a very long trajectory. The Don River project was started before I got here in 2004, and it'll open in about a year. So that's 20 years. It will have survived several mayors, several premiers, and a few prime ministers.
I know when you're building a city, you're never done.
Right.
But essentially, what you have in mind, how long will it take to do all that?
Well, yeah, I mean, a city is never done. You're exactly right. And I used to really hate this question, in fact, because it's like saying, when will downtown Toronto be done? I don't know. Is it done? Is it not done? Is the financial core done? Villiers Island, we think, is a 20 to 30 year build out. What we've been working on the East Bayfront has a shorter time frame left, about 10, 15 years with the Quayside project. So I think 20 to 30 years, we're going to see a very different waterfront. The rest of the Portlands will take longer. That's 50 years plus. So, I mean, it's hundreds of acres of land. It's the size of the whole downtown core, and that was not built in 20 years. Will
you give a commitment to this audience that you will stay in this job until the...
Well, it depends on my health, I suppose.
Okay, last question before we go to the crowd, and that is, you're originally from New Jersey, right?
Yes, I am. I don't like to tell people that.
Okay, so the most important question of the day. Sinatra or Springsteen?
Oh, well, definitely Springsteen, because I went to public high school, and all public school in New Jersey, and all of the desks used to be wood, as you mirror, the desktops were wood. And there were very few desks that you could ever sit at that did not have Springsteen carved into them by generations of kids with their pens and their pen knives and coloring them in. I never saw Sinatra's name on a desk once.
I can't tell you how heartbroken I am with that answer. But anyway. Okay. Questions, please, from the floor. Anybody, raise your hand. There's one right there. We got 2 right there, actually. Here comes the microphone. If you want to introduce yourself, please do. If you want to stand, please do, so we can all see you. And let's hear you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Norman Pasquale, a longtime fan of Waterfront Toronto and the waterfront in general. One thing that always impressed me about Waterfront Toronto was their ability to think out 20, 50, 100 years into the future. I'm just wondering, what part of those 50 or 100-year plans have you had to pivot from the most? It's always great to have a long-term plan, but then there are times where you have to pivot based on current realities. I'm just wondering where you had to pivot most on those long-term plans that Waterfront Toronto has set.
Boy, Norm, we shouldn't have invited you. That's a really hard question. Sorry. I think George wants to answer that. Come on up, George.
Wish I'd thought of that question. That's a good one.
Okay, I think one of the things that we're good at is looking at the bigger vision, but the reality is you can't do it all at the same time. So flood protection, for those who've been here for a long time, was one of the big priorities. And the intent was to flood protect both the north part and the south part. So the north part we did through Corkdown Common and the West Donlands. So we have to pivot and look at, okay, can't do it all at the same time. What do we want to do and how do we want to phase it in? And there are a number of priorities, and to go back to one of the questions, we can't do this alone. I got Sandra Pupatel and others here, agencies that we work with every day. These are activities that we have to coordinate. And we have to align to some of the things that the city's doing with the Gardiner and others. So I think the key is to have that bigger vision, but to be able to pivot and phase it in a way that still lives to the vision, but moves things. What you don't want to do is wait to resolve every issue.
Anything to add?
My boss said that. I'm going to agree.
Good. Sekwa, I think I saw your hand up there. Or was there... Yes, right there. You, sir. Yes, and then we'll come over here.
My name's Rick Amos. My question is, you have a time frame, and that time frame is going to end soon. What's the possibility of that time frame extending?
I can see Chris is looking at me for this one as well. So this is what I can share. We're in, and we've been in some deep conversations with all 3 levels of government for some time. I would say we're in a good place. And I was on the other side at the province when we had to negotiate an extension from 2023 to 2028. I think the alignment will be based on what governments approve in terms of how much is going to be done by when. And I think that alignment of our mandate will adjust to that.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Who do you negotiate with?
We negotiate with the federal ministers, so in this case, Sean Fraser. We've gone through a few ministers. And again, the Minister for Infrastructure, Sosarma, and then the mayor. Now, we negotiate with the staff initially to get them on side. They provide the recommendations. But the one thing we've also learned is we have to negotiate and get the finance ministers on side. So that's the part of the discussion, because ministers can advocate for us all they want. They have to get the money. And it is the purse holder who will make or break us, right?
Who's the smartest minister you work with and who's the dumbest?
Steve, they were all smart, right?
Who's the next question? Okay, right here, please, in the front.
Okay. I saw the plan for the playground downstairs. It was the second time I've seen it. I loved it the first time. I love it even more this time. I mean, I think this is something would be so alive for the development of this area. And I just wonder if somebody would say something about the playground, because I think it's such an original thing to be thinking of at the beginning of developing a new live area of the city.
Chris.
Yeah, I'm happy to say a few things about it. First is the model for that, and I don't mean the physical model, the prototype, is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's called the Gathering Place Park. It's very comparable to what we've done here. The park itself is about the same size as the wetlands and parks we're creating along the river. And at its core, it has a very large, what's called destination playground in it. And it has transformed Tulsa. It has actually been part of their talent retention program, because families have something they can take their kids to. And it has infected, in a way, in a positive way, the minds of everybody. I mean, George and I were there, and you could sit in a coffee shop and talk about the playground, and people would know about it and say, oh yeah, you know, you should use this, or you should check out this part. Like, everyone knew it, and it became part of the city's identity. That's what we're trying to do here. We also really want to attract families to the waterfront and keep families in the downtown. This is the type of facility that would really do that. And it's a very magical design by Michael Van Valkenburg, who designed the one in Tulsa and is designing this one.
I saw another hand. Okay, we got time for one more question, Carol? Is that all right? Okay, last question right here.
Hi, my name is Eric Lombardi. I'm with More Neighbors Toronto.
You've been a guest on the agenda.
I have, yeah. You know, by the way, I live in Canary District, so I'm very familiar with Waterfront Toronto, but I feel like a 50-year timeline in the midst of a housing crisis does not really meet the urgency of the moment that this presents us. So how would you accelerate your plans for the Portlands to deliver more housing in this neighborhood to be fully realized in a shorter period of time?
Yeah, I mean, I can do it unless you want to answer that one, George.
No, you go ahead.
No, that's a great question. So we're actually building it in phases. I was talking about the ultimate build-out. Our plan right now is to have first occupancy, including affordable housing and probably affordable rental on Villiers Island in the next seven years or so, which is about what it takes to go through design and approvals and construction for it. So you know, you can't build this housing in a year, but you can build it pretty quick, and that's what we're hoping to do.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add, well, first of all, for people that recognize, even on Villiers, we have worked with the city and Cratio and others to get the city to approve 60% more density on that same land. We need to have transit. That's the part that we've already got funding to support. And Steve, to your earlier question, the city's made this one of their top two. Eglinton East is one of their top ones, and the Waterfront LRT. So those are critical parts, because there's no sense building all this housing if people can't get there. The other part is we're building a lot of affordable housing and market rental, and we're filling a gap that the market has not filled, which is 2, 3, and 4 bedroom family units. So I think we've got that plan. The good thing is governments are seized with this policy objective. What we need to do is take advantage to push through some of the barriers to moving quickly. And that's one of the things we were created for. We were created to push governments, to find ways to get them to do things quicker and to do things probably at a bigger scale.
Just before, are you the guy who wraps this thing up?
I am.
Okay, before you do that, can I just ask this audience for a hand for Chris Glaisek for a really wonderful presentation? Good job. Yeah, right?